She was a mother of two, working double shifts, barely surviving on scraps. To the world, she was invisible. But to her landlord, she was worse than invisible, she was a target. He mocked her, insulted her, stripped her of her dignity in front of her children. That day, humiliation became her burden. But what he didn't know, was that humiliation would also become her weapon. The air inside Angela Carter's apartment was heavy with the smell of mildew and peeling paint. The cracked window in the living room rattled every time the winter wind pushed against it. Her two children, Marcus, 9, and Naomi, 6, sat huddled near a space heater, trying to keep warm. Angela balanced a pot of beans on the stove, the cheapest meal she could afford. Every clang of the spoon against the metal pot reminded her of the pennies she had counted earlier that morning. Rent was overdue again. The kids were too young to know the full story, but they felt the tension. Naomi tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, when will the heat come back on?" Angela forced a smile. "Soon, baby. Mommy's working on it." But she wasn't. She had called the landlord 4 times that week. The heat had been out for days, and every call went straight to voicemail. That's when the knock came at the door. Not the kind of polite knock that neighbors use, but a pounding, arrogant rhythm that made her stomach sink. Angela froze. Marcus whispered, "Is it him?" Angela swallowed hard. "Yes. Stay here." The door creaked open to reveal Mr. Richard Holden, the landlord. A tall, broad-shouldered white man in his late 50s, his belly pressing against a tailored coat, his face twisted in permanent disdain. He didn't step inside at first. He just looked around the apartment with his sharp, judgmental eyes, as though breathing the same air was beneath him. Well, he sneered. "Still behind on rent, huh?" Angela tightened her grip on the doorframe. "Mr. Holden, I told you, I'm working double shifts. I'll have it by the end of the month." "But the heat." He cut her off with a laugh. "The heat? Lady, you're 3 weeks late. You think I'm rushing to fix anything for you? You can't even pay me." Angela's voice wavered. "My kids are freezing." Holden's smile widened. Cruel. Mocking. "Maybe if you kept your legs closed, you wouldn't have so many mouths to feed." Angela flinched like she had been struck. Her kids heard every word. She glanced back and saw Marcus clenching his little fists, his eyes wet with anger. "Don't talk about my children," Angela whispered. Holden stepped closer, lowering his voice but dripping venom in every word. "You'll always be stuck here. Women like you, black single mothers, you'll never rise above. You'll always be begging. And I'll always be the one collecting." The words echoed like thunder. Angela wanted to scream, but the weight of powerlessness crushed her chest. She could feel Marcus's eyes burning into her back, waiting for her to fight back. But all she could do was swallow the shame. Finally, Holden smirked and turned to leave. "Pay up, or get out. That's the deal. And don't bother calling me about the heat again." The door slammed, leaving silence in its wake. Naomi whispered, "Mommy." Angela turned, tears threatening to spill, but forced her voice steady. "It's okay, baby. Mommy's got us." But in that moment, Angela felt anything but okay. That night, after the kids were asleep, Angela sat at the kitchen table with the rent notice in one hand and an eviction warning in the other. Her chest ached. She whispered to herself, "Is this it? Is this all my life will ever be?" But then her eyes drifted to Marcus's drawing taped to the fridge. A crayon picture of a house, with stick figures of Angela, Marcus, and Naomi standing in front of it. Above the picture, Marcus had scribbled, "Our home one day." Angela's tears finally fell. She put her head in her hands, and for the first time in years, she prayed. Not for survival, but for strength. Something in her shifted that night. Shame turned into anger. Anger turned into resolve. One day, she whispered, gripping Marcus's drawing, "I won't just survive. I'll rise. And when I do, he'll see me." Angela's journey didn't change overnight. She still worked back-to-back shifts at the diner, sometimes until her feet bled. She still counted coins for groceries. She still cried herself to sleep on nights when the weight of bills felt unbearable. But little by little, she began to shift her mindset. She picked up books at the library about business and real estate. She listened to podcasts on her way to work about wealth building and financial independence. She started writing down ideas, small ones at first, budgeting, saving, even if it was just $5 a week. Every insult Richard Holden had thrown at her replayed in her mind like fuel. "You'll always be begging. You'll never rise above." Each word became a spark that kept her pushing through exhaustion. But Holden wasn't done humiliating her. One spring afternoon, Angela was late on rent again. She had begged him for an extension, explaining she was waiting for her paycheck to clear. Holden agreed, but with a cruel smirk, he added a condition. "Come down to the building office," he said. Angela went, only to find Holden waiting with two of his wealthy friends. They sat drinking whiskey, laughing, and when Angela entered, Holden grinned like a predator. "Gentlemen," he said, "this is one of my tenants. Always late on rent, always making excuses. She's the perfect example of why some people just can't handle responsibility." The men chuckled. One of them muttered, "Figures." Angela's cheeks burned. She wanted to storm out, but Holden wasn't finished. He leaned forward, his voice loud enough to echo. "You know what the funniest part is? She actually thinks she can buy her way out of this life. Isn't that right, Angela? You're always talking about saving up for some dream. Well, newsflash, you'll die here, still owing me rent." The room erupted in laughter. Angela's throat tightened, humiliation choking her. She left the office with her fists trembling, her heart on fire. That night, she stood in front of the mirror, looking at her own reflection. Her face was tired, worn, lined with struggle, but her eyes burned with something new. "Never again," she whispered. "Never again will I let him make me feel small." Angela began working smarter. She found a mentor at the diner, Mrs. Elaine Brooks, a retired teacher who volunteered at a community financial literacy program. Elaine saw Angela's hunger to learn and took her under her wing. Through Elaine, Angela learned about credit repair, savings plans, and most importantly, real estate investment. At first, it sounded impossible. How could a woman who barely scraped by ever dream of owning property? But Elaine's words stuck with her. "Angela, wealth isn't built overnight. It's built brick by brick. Start with one brick." So Angela did. She took on a side hustle cleaning houses on weekends. Every extra dollar went into savings. She cut out every luxury, no new clothes, no eating out, no cable. Her life became sacrifice. But she was no longer just surviving. She was building. 2 years later, Angela had saved enough for a down payment on a small, run-down duplex. It wasn't glamorous. The paint was chipped, the plumbing unreliable. But it was hers. The day she signed the papers, she walked outside the courthouse and cried. Not from exhaustion this time, but from victory. She whispered to herself, "This is the first brick." But in the back of her mind, she thought of Holden. She thought of his laughter, his arrogance, his certainty that she would never rise. And in that moment, Angela made a silent vow. "One day, Richard Holden. I won't just be free from you. I'll own everything you thought I couldn't." Years passed. Angela expanded, reinvested, bought more properties. Each building was a scar turned into strength, each deed a victory etched in paper. One summer morning, she received a call from her realtor. "Angela, you're not going to believe this. There's a building going up for sale downtown. Big one. Perfect investment. Guess who owns it? Angela's heart stopped. The realtor whispered the name. Richard Halden. Angela froze, the weight of destiny pressing down on her shoulders. Her past had come full circle. The man who mocked her, the man who humiliated her in front of her children, was about to lose everything. And the woman he swore would always be beneath him now had the power to rise above. Angela gripped the phone, her voice steady, fierce. Put in the offer. When you've been told 1,000 times that you don't belong, every step forward feels like a revolution. For Jasmine, that revolution began in silence, with no one cheering her on, just the echo of her landlord's laughter haunting her every move. But what David never realized, was that the same single mother he mocked was building an empire brick by brick, right beneath his feet. The weeks following that humiliating encounter with David Morrison were some of the darkest in Jasmine Carter's life. Every time she walked through the lobby of that crumbling apartment building, she could still hear his mocking tone. His words had burrowed into her mind like a parasite, replaying at the most painful moments. Women like you don't last here. You'll beg me for mercy before the year is out. She carried those words into her job at the diner, into the quiet moments after putting her son Elijah to bed, and even into church, where she prayed for the strength not to give up. Bills piled up. Her boss gave her extra shifts, but even that wasn't enough to cover rent and food. And every time she handed over that check to David Morrison's office, she could feel his smirk without even seeing his face. But what David never understood was that humiliation is fuel. For some, it destroys. For Jasmine, it ignited. One evening, after a long shift at the diner, Jasmine sat in her small kitchen, staring at the eviction notice David had slid under her door. It wasn't for late payment. No. It was for audacity. She had dared to complain about a leaking pipe in her bathroom that had caused mold to spread across the wall where her son slept. David's response was not to fix it but to threaten her. If you don't like it here, leave. I got people lining up for this spot. You think you're special? Her hands trembled as she held the notice, but her eyes burned with something new, determination. That night, after Elijah fell asleep, she pulled out a notebook and wrote a single sentence at the top of the page. One day, I will never have to beg him again. At first, it was small. Jasmine started saving every dollar she could. She cut out everything non-essential. No new clothes. No eating out. No cable TV. She even started selling homemade meals from her kitchen to neighbors and coworkers, carrying Tupperware filled with rice and beans, chicken stew, and cornbread to the diner. Word spread quickly, people loved her food. Soon, orders came in daily, and she was making more in her side hustle than her diner job. Still, it wasn't enough to buy freedom. So she expanded. Jasmine started attending weekend business classes at the local community center. She learned about credit, loans, and real estate, subjects that felt like another world at first. She'd sit in the back, scribbling notes furiously, her mind racing with possibilities. And through it all, she never told a soul about her plan. Not her coworkers. Not her church friends. Not even her mother. This was her secret fire. While Jasmine scraped and clawed her way toward stability, David Morrison grew bolder. His building, though falling apart, was a goldmine. He raised rent every 6 months, forcing out families who couldn't keep up. He loved control. He loved watching people squirm. And most of all, he loved watching Jasmine struggle. He told his friends at the country club about her. There's this black woman in one of my units. Single mom. Thinks she's tough. But give it time. They always break. To David, she wasn't a tenant. She was entertainment. Years passed. Elijah grew into a teenager, tall and sharp, protective of his mother. Jasmine had grown too. Her food business had expanded into a small catering company, and she had left the diner behind. But she still lived in that same apartment building, under David Morrison's shadow. Why? Because she wasn't finished. One night, Elijah found her at the kitchen table, surrounded by loan documents, property listings, and spreadsheets. "Mom," he asked softly, "why are you still here if you hate it so much?" Jasmine looked at him, her eyes steady. "Because one day, I'm going to own this place. And when I do, he'll never hurt another family again." Elijah didn't laugh. He believed her. Jasmine's catering business secured its first big contract, a local hospital cafeteria. The profits allowed her to put a down payment on a small duplex in a struggling neighborhood. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. She fixed it up, rented it out, and reinvested the profits. Then another property. Then another. Each one brought her closer to her dream. But real estate is not a quiet game. And soon, David Morrison noticed. It was a chance meeting in the building lobby. Jasmine was carrying grocery bags when David stepped out of the elevator, freshly pressed suit and smug grin plastered on his face. "Well, well," he sneered. "I hear you've been playing landlord in the poor side of town. Cute. Must be hard, juggling bills and babysitting those tenants." Jasmine set her bags down, looked him straight in the eyes, and said calmly, "Don't worry, David. I'll be playing in your league soon enough." For the first time, his smile faltered. Behind closed doors, David began to pay attention. He called his accountant. He checked public property records. And when he saw Jasmine Carter's name attached to more than one deed, something twisted in his gut. This wasn't just a tenant anymore. This was a threat. He began making life harder for her. Surprise inspections. Petty fines. Even trying to sabotage her catering contracts by spreading rumors about her food safety. But Jasmine had weathered storms before. And every attempt he made only sharpened her resolve. By the time Elijah was preparing to leave for college, Jasmine had amassed enough savings and credit to make a bold move. She learned, through whispers in the real estate community, that David Morrison was in trouble. Bad investments. Mounting debt. His empire was cracking, though he tried desperately to hide it. And the building where Jasmine still lived? His crown jewel. It was about to go up for sale. She sat in her car outside the realtor's office, hands shaking as she signed the paperwork for the bid. This wasn't just a property. This was destiny. When David Morrison received notice of the highest bidder, he stormed into the realtor's office, demanding to know who had dared to buy his building. The agent slid the paper across the desk. His eyes scanned the name once, then twice. Jasmine Carter. His face went pale. His empire was crumbling. But the war had only just begun. What happens when the man who mocked a single mother finds himself forced to answer to her? Will David Morrison fight back, or will Jasmine finally bring justice to every family he once oppressed? The world tells single mothers to stay in their lane. To survive, not to rise. But when survival turns into strength, strength turns into power. And power, in the hands of the oppressed, can bring empires crashing down. For Jasmine Carter, the day she signed her name on that deed wasn't the end of her struggle, it was the beginning of a storm no one could stop. The morning after the deal closed, Jasmine stood in front of the building she once begged to keep a roof over her son's head in. The sun hit the red bricks, cracked with time and neglect, but to her, they shone like gold. She clutched the keys in her hand. Keys that once belonged to David Morrison. Keys that symbolized more than ownership, they symbolized freedom. But when she walked into the lobby, the tenants weren't cheering. They were skeptical. They'd seen landlords come and go, promising repairs and fairness, only to disappear with their money. Jasmine raised her voice. "I'm not here to take from you. I'm here because I lived what you lived. I know the leaks. I know the rats. I know the way he treated us. And I promise you this, those days are over." A hush filled the room. For the first time in years, the tenants dared to believe. Meanwhile, across town, David Morrison raged. His friends at the country club had heard the news. They whispered behind his back, mocking him for being outplayed by a woman he once called worthless. He stormed into his office, smashing a glass of whiskey against the wall. "She thinks she's won. She thinks she's smarter than me. This isn't over. That building is mine. She'll regret ever trying to take what belongs to me." But David's anger wasn't just pride. It was fear. That building had been his safety net, his golden egg. Without it, his debts loomed larger. He was losing ground fast, and Jasmine Carter was standing on the very piece of land he needed most. Jasmine poured every ounce of her heart into that building. She hired contractors to fix the broken plumbing. She brought in exterminators to rid the place of vermin. She painted hallways, repaired locks, and turned what once felt like a prison into something closer to home. And she didn't stop there. Jasmine created a community fund, using a percentage of rent to support tenants in crisis. A single mother who lost her job could get temporary help. An elderly resident could receive home repairs. Children were given after-school tutoring programs in the basement community room. The building wasn't just real estate anymore. It was a lifeline. And word spread beyond those walls. Soon, newspapers picked up her story: former tenant becomes owner, Jasmine Carter redefines landlordship. But David wasn't finished. He filed lawsuits, claiming the sale wasn't legitimate. He bribed city inspectors to look for violations in Jasmine's management. He even offered to buy the building back at double the price, just to humiliate her. Each move drained Jasmine emotionally and financially. Nights she once spent dreaming of freedom were now consumed by paperwork, lawyers, and sleepless worry. One evening, as she sat at the kitchen table with stacks of legal documents, Elijah, now in college, called her. "Mom," he said gently, "don't let him break you. Remember why you started this. You're not just fighting for yourself anymore. You're fighting for every family that ever felt small under his shadow." His words lit a fire in her again. What David didn't expect was the power of community. The tenants, once weary and broken, rallied behind Jasmine. They started a neighborhood petition, holding rallies in support of her ownership. Churches and local leaders joined in, declaring her story as proof of resilience and justice. Jasmine wasn't just a landlord anymore. She had become a symbol. And David hated it. As David's empire collapsed, creditors came knocking. His properties were falling into foreclosure, his accounts bled dry. He had spent decades stepping on people like Jasmine, and now, karma was collecting its debt. But desperation makes dangerous men. David began whispering threats, hiring men to intimidate tenants, even vandalizing the building in the dead of night. Jasmine, though afraid, refused to bow. She filed police reports, installed cameras, and stood tall. Still, one night, she returned home to find her office ransacked. Papers scattered, cabinets smashed, and across the wall in red spray paint. "You'll never win." Her hands shook. Her knees buckled. But instead of fear, she felt rage. The pressure built until one final confrontation seemed inevitable. At a city council meeting where Jasmine was being honored for her contributions to housing reform, David showed up. He stood at the back of the room, glaring, his face red with anger. As Jasmine took the stage, speaking about dignity, justice, and opportunity, David stormed forward, pointing a finger at her. "She's a fraud," he shouted. "You people think she's a hero? She's nothing. I made her. She lived off me. Without me, she'd still be nothing." The crowd gasped. Cameras flashed. Reporters swarmed. And Jasmine paused. She looked at him, then at the audience, her voice steady. "No, David. Without you, I would have been free sooner. But because of you, I learned how strong I really am. And nothing you do can take that away. The room erupted in applause. David stormed out, his empire in ashes, his pride shattered. But this wasn't the end. Not yet. Later that night, Jasmine received a phone call from her lawyer. "Jasmine," he said gravely, "you need to sit down for this. David Morrison just filed a motion to seize your building. And he claims he has proof of fraud in the purchase agreement." Her heart pounded. If David's claim was accepted, everything she had built, the homes, the community, the symbol of triumph, could be stripped away in an instant. When a system is built to break you, survival is rebellion. But when survival transforms into victory, it sends shockwaves through history. Jasmine Carter was about to face her greatest test yet, the moment where everything she had fought for, everything she had sacrificed, hung by a single thread. Would her victory be stolen in the shadows of corruption? Or would she rise to prove that justice, though delayed, cannot be denied? The courtroom was packed. Lawyers in dark suits shuffled papers, reporters whispered into microphones, and curious spectators filled every seat. At the front, Jasmine sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded tightly on her lap. On the other side, David Morrison leaned back in his chair, smirking, flanked by a team of expensive attorneys. His eyes locked on her, burning with smugness. The judge entered, and silence fell. David's lawyers began their attack. "Your Honor, we have evidence suggesting the sale of Morrison Apartments was obtained under fraudulent conditions. Ms. Carter, a former tenant, colluded with outside investors to acquire the property through deceptive means. We request immediate seizure of the building and reinstatement of Mr. Morrison as rightful owner." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Jasmine's chest tightened. Fraud? Deception? She had fought tooth and nail with honesty. Her lawyer stood calm but firm. "Your Honor, what Mr. Morrison calls fraud, we call opportunity. Ms. Carter lawfully partnered with a community development fund, secured financing, and legally purchased the building through the city's auction process. The only fraud here is the way Mr. Morrison mistreated tenants for decades, extracting wealth while giving them nothing in return. We have tenants, city officials, and documents to prove it." One by one, tenants testified. An elderly woman described years of living with broken heat in the winter. A single father spoke about begging David for repairs while his children slept on floors with rats. A disabled veteran told the court how David mocked him when he fell behind on rent. And finally, Jasmine took the stand. Her voice shook at first, but she steadied herself. "I was one of those tenants. I remember standing outside his office with my son, Elijah, begging for more time to pay rent. He laughed in my face. Told me I was nothing. But I promised my son I'd change things. Not just for us, but for everyone. That's why I bought the building. Not to take from anyone, but to give back what was stolen." Her words didn't just fill the courtroom. They pierced hearts. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras zoomed in, and even the judge leaned forward. David rose suddenly, unable to contain his rage. "She's lying," he shouted. "She tricked the system. She doesn't belong here. People like her don't build, they destroy." His voice cracked, not with power, but with desperation. And in that moment, the mask of superiority he had worn his entire life slipped. He wasn't a titan of real estate anymore. He was just a bitter man grasping at a past he no longer owned. After days of testimony, the courtroom held its breath. The judge adjusted his glasses, his voice firm. "Having reviewed the evidence, this court finds no basis for Mr. Morrison's claims of fraud. The purchase of Morrison Apartments was lawful. Furthermore, this court recognizes Ms. Carter's significant contributions to improving tenant welfare. Effective immediately, Jasmine Carter is confirmed as the rightful and legal owner." The room erupted. Tenants cheered, reporters rushed out to file stories, and tears welled in Jasmine's eyes. Across the aisle, David slumped in his chair, defeated. For the first time in his life, he had lost, and not just money, but power, reputation, and control. Back at the building, tenants threw a block party in Jasmine's honor. Music filled the streets. Children danced. Families ate together on long tables covered in food. Elijah hugged his mother tightly. "You did it, Mom. You didn't just buy a building. You built a future." And for Jasmine, the victory wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving David wrong. It was about proving every doubter, every system, every voice that said she couldn't, wrong. She smiled, looking up at the building that now bore her name on the deed. "This isn't the end," she whispered. "This is just the beginning. This is more than a story about real estate. It's about resilience. It's about a black woman, a single mother, told she was worthless, rising to own the very walls that once held her down." Jasmine Carter's story is a reminder: oppression doesn't have the final word. Courage does. And when courage stands tall, no empire of greed can stand against it. If Jasmine's story moved you, if you believe in fighting back when the odds are stacked against you, then don't just watch, be part of the change. Share this video. Start conversations. Support single mothers, uplift struggling families, and remember, justice is not given. It's built. One story, one victory, one community at a time. Because voices like Jasmine's, and voices like yours, can never be silenced.